The small diner sat on the edge of the highway like it had been forgotten by time. Neon lights flickered weakly in the window, buzzing against the quiet night air. Inside, the place smelled of old grease, burnt coffee, and tired conversations. It was the kind of spot where truckers stopped for quick meals and locals came because there was nowhere else open this late. The booths were cracked leather, the walls yellowed with years of smoke, and the ceiling fan clicked with every turn, as if counting down the minutes until something would happen. When the door opened, a cold wind rushed in, and the few people inside looked up. A man walked in slowly, not in a rush, not making any sound except for the heavy boots on the floor. He was tall, shoulders straight, but his face carried lines of battles fought long ago. His jacket was faded army green, with patches sewn onto it. One patch showed the American flag. Another, smaller but shining, showed that he had once served overseas. His skin was dark, and his eyes were calm, too calm, like he had seen worse things than any of the people in that diner ever would. He did not smile. He did not frown. He only walked to an empty booth in the corner and sat down, folding his hands on the table. The diner was quiet for a moment. A truck driver at the counter shifted in his seat. An older couple in the next booth leaned closer, whispering to each other. They all knew that jacket. They all knew what it meant. But no one spoke to him. The waitress came over, holding a menu she didn't bother to set down. She was in her late 20s, her blonde hair tied up in a messy bun. Her face was sharp, eyes narrow, her smile thin and cold. She looked at the man like he didn't belong here. "What'll it be?" she asked, her tone flat, almost mocking. The man looked up at her. His voice was low but steady. "Just some water. And the special, if you got it tonight." She raised a brow, glanced at his jacket, then at his skin. For a moment, something ugly passed across her face. She walked away without another word. The man leaned back against the booth. He was used to stares, used to silence, used to people pretending not to see him. He had carried that weight since he came back home. But tonight, in this diner, something felt heavier. Maybe it was the way people looked at him but kept their mouths shut. Maybe it was the way the waitress walked, her steps sharp and loud, like she wanted him to know she was angry he was even sitting there. When she came back, she placed a glass of water on the table. The glass was cloudy, rim stained with something that looked like old lipstick, the water itself not even full. The man looked at it quietly. He didn't lift it. The waitress smirked. "Something wrong with your drink?" His eyes met hers. He didn't answer. A moment of silence stretched out. The couple in the booth next to him glanced at the glass, then at the man. They knew what they saw. The truck driver at the counter shifted again, his hand tightening around his coffee mug. But still, no one spoke. No one stood up. The waitress shrugged and walked away, pretending it was nothing. The man sat there, his hand resting on the table. He could feel the heat in his chest, the quiet insult burning deeper than he wanted to admit. He had been through war. He had faced enemy fire. He had buried friends. He had fought for people who would never know his name. And yet, here, in the country he fought for, he was being told, without words, that he was less. Still, he did not speak. The food came a few minutes later, slid across the table without care. The eggs were runny, the toast half-burnt, the meat barely cooked. He looked at it the same way he looked at the glass. Then he lifted his fork and began to eat, one slow bite at a time. Around him, the diner tried to pretend nothing was happening. But the silence was heavy. A young boy with his father at the far end of the counter whispered, "Daddy, why is that man's water dirty?" His father hushed him quickly, glancing nervously at the waitress. The man kept eating. Every movement was controlled, calm, as if he refused to give anyone the reaction they were waiting for. His silence was louder than any anger could have been. The waitress passed by again, carrying plates for another table. She leaned slightly toward him and muttered under her breath, "Should have gone somewhere else." He didn't look at her. He didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing he heard. When his plate was clean, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he took out a few bills, more than enough to cover the meal, and set them on the table. He slid out of the booth, stood tall, and adjusted his jacket. For a brief second, the light caught on a medal pinned to his chest, a medal that spoke of bravery in combat. Some of the customers saw it. Their eyes widened. But again, no one said a word. He walked to the door, his boots heavy on the old wooden floor. He opened it slowly, letting the cold air rush in again, then stepped outside. The door closed behind him with a soft chime of the bell. Inside, the diner felt emptier without him. The couple looked down at their plates, guilty. The truck driver let out a slow breath, staring at the door as if wondering why he hadn't said something. The little boy whispered again, "Daddy, he looked like a hero." The waitress only laughed softly, shaking her head as she wiped down the counter. Hero? He's nobody. But outside, the man walked toward a dark pickup truck parked at the far end of the lot. On the back bumper were two stickers, one showing the name of his old unit, the other the words Purple Heart. He climbed into the truck, turned on the engine, and drove away into the night. Back inside, no one knew it yet, but the quiet man's presence had changed something. The silence he left behind was heavier than his footsteps. The waitress thought she had won by mocking him, by giving him a dirty glass. But she had no idea what the next day would bring. The diner's fate was already sealed. The night after the incident, the town lay quiet under the pale glow of streetlights. The diner had closed hours earlier, its neon sign still buzzing weakly in the dark. The waitress walked home with a small smile, believing she had won something by mocking the man in the green jacket. To her, it was just another night of serving food and pushing around those she thought were beneath her. She didn't know the weight of the silence she had left behind. Inside the diner earlier, no one had spoken up. The couple had lowered their heads, ashamed but unwilling to get involved. The truck driver had clenched his jaw, but kept staring into his coffee. Even the father with the little boy had chosen silence over truth. Everyone had seen the dirty glass, the smirk, the insult, but no one had dared to step in. The man himself had said nothing. Not a word of anger, not a word of complaint. He had eaten the poor meal, left his money, and walked out with his back straight, his eyes calm. Yet his silence was louder than if he had shouted. It lingered in the air, filling the empty booths, clinging to the walls like smoke. By morning, some of the regulars couldn't stop thinking about it. The truck driver was the first. He sat in his rig before heading out on the highway, staring at the steering wheel. He had served once 2 years ago, not in combat, but enough to know the meaning of the patches on that jacket. He whispered to himself, should have said something. But the words came too late. The couple, sitting at breakfast in their home, spoke in low voices. "He was a soldier," the husband said. "Did you see the medal?" His wife nodded slowly, her eyes clouded. "Yes. And she treated him like dirt. We let it happen." Their coffee tasted bitter that morning, not because of the brew, but because of the shame sitting heavy on their tongues. Even the father who hushed his son felt it. He drove his boy to school, but the little voice came from the back seat, "Daddy, why didn't you help him? He looked like a hero." The father tightened his grip on the wheel, throat dry, no answer ready. He only muttered, "Some things are complicated." But deep down, he knew it wasn't complicated at all. It was simple. He had chosen silence. Meanwhile, the waitress bragged in the kitchen when she came back to work. She told the cook how she had put that guy in his place. She laughed about the dirty glass, about how he didn't even fight back. The cook didn't laugh. He just stared at her, his hands still on the grill, the meat sizzling as if it carried the anger he couldn't voice. But outside the diner, in places she couldn't see, whispers had begun to spread. The truck driver, unable to hold it in, mentioned it at the next gas stop. Some guy in uniform, a vet, walked into the diner last night. They gave him a filthy glass of water like he was nothing. His voice carried weight, and other drivers listened. One of them knew a man from the local veterans post. That's how the story began to move. By noon, 2 different townspeople had told the same tale, with small changes but the same sharp truth at the center: a black veteran, disrespected in his own country, treated like he was less than human. The veteran himself said nothing. He didn't post on social media. He didn't call anyone to complain. He simply drove his truck back to his small home on the outskirts of town. The house was plain, one story, the yard uncut, the mailbox rusted. Inside, it was quiet. On the walls hung photos from years gone by, men in uniform, battlefields in faraway places, a younger version of himself standing with comrades who would never return. He set his jacket on the back of a chair and sat at the table. His hands rested there for a long time. The glass from the diner still lingered in his mind, not because of what it was, but because of what it meant. It wasn't the first time he had been treated like that. It wasn't the second, or the third. But every time, it cut deeper, not into his pride, but into his heart. The silence of his home matched the silence he had given in the diner. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't need to. Because silence has a way of traveling. That evening, a man walked into the local bar wearing a leather vest covered in patches. He was another veteran, part of a writers' group made up of men and women who had all served. He had heard the story from the truck driver at a pit stop. He leaned against the bar and said, "Did you hear what happened at the diner last night?" The bartender shook his head. The veteran told him, voice low, words heavy. By the time he finished, the entire bar had gone silent. One of them asked, "Who was the man?" The writer shrugged. "Don't know his name. But I know what he is. He's one of us." And just like that, the silence began to stir into something stronger. The next morning, the waitress walked into the diner again, expecting another day of easy work and easy jokes. She didn't notice the way people looked at her, the way the cook's eyes had grown colder, the way customers sat quieter. Something had shifted, though she didn't see it yet. The man in the green jacket didn't return that day. He stayed home, his truck parked outside, his medals untouched in a box. He wasn't waiting for anything to happen. He didn't need revenge, didn't plan to make noise. His silence was his choice. He had already carried louder battles inside him than most would ever know. But in town, the silence was not being ignored anymore. It was being carried by whispers, by guilt, by the quiet shame of people who had seen what happened and done nothing. Some of them wanted to forget it. Others couldn't. The veteran said nothing. Yet the world around him had already started speaking for him. And while the waitress thought she had silenced him with a dirty glass, she was wrong. The truth was, his silence was not weakness. It was power. And soon, that silence would echo louder than her laughter ever could. The diner's fate had already begun to change. Morning light spread across the small town like a secret being revealed slowly. The streets were quiet, shop windows opening one by one, people starting their day with the same routine they had always followed. But beneath that calm surface, whispers were spreading. Something had happened at the diner, and it would not stay hidden. The story didn't begin on the news or in a newspaper. It began in small voices, at gas stations, in grocery aisles, over back fences between neighbors. "Did you hear about the man at the diner?" The question floated from mouth to mouth. Each retelling was slightly different, but the heart of it was the same. A veteran, a soldier who had worn his country's uniform, was given a dirty glass of water by a waitress who laughed at him. Some spoke of it with anger. "That's no way to treat a man who served." Others with shame. "We saw it happen, and no one said a word." The words traveled like smoke, curling into every corner of the town. At the small hardware store, the truck driver from that night leaned against the counter, talking to the owner. His voice was heavy. He didn't even raise his voice. Just sat there, ate the meal, left his money, and walked out. Like he's been carrying this kind of thing his whole life. The store owner shook his head slowly. "I know the type. Quiet men. The ones who've seen more than we can imagine." At the school, the little boy who had seen the dirty glass whispered to his friends. He was a hero. I think he had medals. But the waitress was mean to him. Children listened with wide eyes, repeating it to their parents that evening. What began as a single insult was now becoming a town's uneasy conscience. The waitress, however, noticed none of this. She strutted into the diner, hair done up tighter, smile sharper, still proud of what she thought had been her small victory. She bragged to another waitress, "You should have seen his face. He just sat there, like he knew he didn't belong." She laughed, but the sound didn't land the same as before. The cook looked up at her from behind the grill, ice hard. He said nothing, but she felt it, the rune wasn't with her anymore. That evening, in the local bar, a group of men in leather jackets sat around a table. Their jackets bore patches, their arms inked with old tattoos that told silent stories of war. One of them was the writer who had first heard the tale at the gas stop. He leaned forward, speaking low but firm. A brother was disrespected at that diner. A black veteran. Treated like nothing. The table fell silent. Some clenched their fists. One of the older veterans, his hair white but his back still straight, tapped the table slowly. "I've buried men who wore that same jacket. I've carried caskets draped with flags." "And she gave him a dirty glass?" His voice trembled with anger. "No. That won't stand." By the next morning, the whispers had become louder. At the church, people spoke about it in the entryway. At the gas station, a small crowd gathered as a man retold the story, his voice growing with each sentence. Some swore they had seen the man before, walking alone near the edge of town, always quiet, never asking for anything. "He's one of ours," they said. The diner owner began to feel the shift. He noticed fewer locals coming in. Some avoided eye contact when passing the place. Others stepped inside only to sit with their arms crossed, their eyes on the waitress, their silence heavy. The owner pulled her aside. "What happened with that man?" he demanded. She shrugged, rolling her eyes. "Nothing. Just some nobody wanting special treatment." But the owner had heard enough whispers to know it wasn't nothing. He rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of something he couldn't ignore much longer. Meanwhile, the veteran himself remained silent. He stayed at home, mowing his yard, fixing a loose hinge on his door, living as though the world wasn't carrying his story on its back. He didn't look at the phone. He didn't check the news. He had no idea how far the whispers had gone. To him, it was just another night of quiet dignity and quiet insult. He thought it would fade like all the others. But the town was restless. Silence had turned into guilt, and guilt into talk. And talk, in a small town, never stays small. 2 nights later, something unusual happened. A line of motorcycles rumbled down the main road, their engines shaking the ground. They weren't speeding. They weren't loud for no reason. They moved in formation, steady and controlled, like soldiers marching. Onlookers turned their heads as the group passed by, leather jackets catching the glow of the streetlights. They stopped, not at the bar, not at the gas station, but at the diner. The waitress was working that night. She saw them pull up and felt a nervous laugh bubble in her throat. "What is this?" she muttered, trying to sound unimpressed. The veterans stepped inside one by one, filling booth after booth, table after table, until every seat was taken. The diner was silent except for the sound of boots and jackets settling. The air grew heavy, every person inside feeling the weight of their presence. They didn't speak yet. They didn't raise their voices. They simply sat, staring at menus, their silence louder than anything else. The waitress swallowed hard, her bravado cracking for the first time. The cook stood straighter behind the grill, his eyes flicking toward her. He understood before anyone else what this was. This wasn't just a meal. This was a reckoning. And the whispers in town, the ones that had started as guilt and shame, were about to take shape inside the diner's walls. The veteran who had been insulted wasn't there. He didn't need to be. His silence had spoken for him, and the town was now carrying his voice. The waitress had thought the dirty glass was the end of it. But in truth, it was only the beginning. The diner had never seen a night like this. The hum of the old neon sign outside was drowned by the low growl of motorcycle engines lined up along the parking lot. Their chrome gleamed under the streetlights, helmets hung from the handlebars, and leather jackets bore patches that told stories of wars fought far away. These were not strangers. These were veterans, men and women who had once carried rifles instead of menus, who had once marched together into danger and returned carrying scars both seen and unseen. Inside, the air grew thick as they filled the booths. Every seat was taken, every corner filled, the room suddenly too small for the weight of their presence. No one was smiling. No one was joking. They sat with a calm intensity, their eyes sharp, their posture unshaken, as if the diner itself had become a battlefield of respect and memory. The waitress felt her hands tremble. She tried to hide it by busying herself behind the counter, pretending to clean a glass. But her eyes kept darting toward them. Her earlier confidence had vanished. When she saw their patches airborne, Marines, Navy, Army Rangers, her mouth went dry. The cook noticed it too. He had kept quiet since the night of the insult, but tonight, he looked at her with something close to disgust. He flipped a burger on the grill, the sizzle loud in the silence, and muttered under his breath, "They're not here for food." The veterans ordered, each in turn, their voices calm and steady. Coffee. Eggs. Burgers. Pie. Nothing fancy. But the way they spoke, the way they looked at the waitress, made her heart pound harder. It wasn't what they ordered, it was what they represented. The door opened again, and more veterans entered. Some were older, gray hair under their caps. Others were younger, still carrying the fire of recent wars in their eyes. A few walked with canes, others with limps. They were different in age, race, and background, but they were united in something larger than themselves. The customers who were already in the diner that night sat frozen. A family of 4 stared in silence. A young couple held hands under the table. They could feel it too, that this was not a normal night. This was something that would be remembered. Finally, one of the veterans stood. He was tall, with a beard streaked gray, his vest covered in patches and pins. His voice was not loud, but it carried like thunder in the quiet room. "Last night," he began, "one of our brothers came in here. A man who gave his years, his blood, and his soul to this country. He was met with disrespect. With cruelty. With a dirty glass and a laugh." The room stayed silent. The waitress stood frozen, the tray in her hands trembling. The man's eyes swept across the room. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't fight back. He didn't need to. Because he is not alone. None of us are. Murmurs moved through the booths. The family in the corner lowered their eyes. The young couple swallowed hard. Even the cook stopped moving, his spatula frozen midair. The veteran's voice grew heavier, not louder. "We bury our dead with honor. We carry each other's burdens when no one else will. And when one of us is treated as less than human, it is not forgotten. It is not ignored. We do not walk away." The waitress could feel every eye shifting toward her, though no one said her name. She wanted to speak, wanted to laugh it off, but the words stuck in her throat. Another veteran, a woman with short hair and sharp eyes, stood next. She had a limp, her cane leaning against the table. "We didn't come here for a fight," she said. "We came to show what honor looks like. We came to show what respect means. Not with fists. Not with shouting. But with presence." They sat again, and the silence returned. But it was a different silence now, heavy, powerful, unshakable. The waitress finally forced herself to move. She placed plates of food on tables, her hands unsteady, her smile fake. Each time she set down a cup of coffee or a plate of eggs, she felt the veteran's eyes on her, not angry, not cruel, but firm. They weren't here to scare her. They weren't here for revenge. They were here to remind her of something she had forgotten: dignity. The cook worked harder than ever, sweating, flipping burgers, pulling pies from the oven, pouring coffee into cups that never stayed empty. The diner buzzed with the sound of plates clinking, forks scraping, chairs shifting. But beneath it all was that same silent current, a current that carried weight heavier than any storm. At one point, a small boy sitting with his parents whispered too loudly, "Daddy, are they here for the man from last night?" The father hushed him, but the veterans at the nearest booth turned and gave the boy a small nod. The boy's eyes widened with awe. He understood in that moment what his father hadn't explained. This was about loyalty, about standing for something bigger than yourself. As the night went on, more veterans arrived. Cars pulled in, boots stepped out, doors opened and shut. The diner overflowed. Some stood along the walls, arms crossed, eyes steady. Others waited outside, smoking quietly, their breath fogging in the cool night. The waitress grew paler with every passing minute. Her laughter was gone now. Her sharp tongue was silent. She served without words, moving like a shadow, wishing the night would end. But it wouldn't. Not yet. When the bills came, the veterans paid them all, each one leaving more than enough on the table. Some left 20s, some 50s, some even hundreds. The waitress stared at the money in disbelief. But she knew it wasn't for her. It wasn't a gift. It was a message. Honor pays in full. The lead veteran stood once more. His voice carried finality. We have made our point. This diner, this town, remember this night. Because our brother deserves respect, and respect is what we demand. Always. They rose together, one after another, boots heavy on the floor. They filed out as quietly as they had entered, their jackets brushing against the cracked leather booths, their presence leaving a mark deeper than any words could. The engines roared to life outside. The ground shook as the motorcycles rolled out in formation, taillights glowing red in the darkness. Within minutes, they were gone, the sound fading down the highway like a storm passing. Inside, the diner was left in silence once again. But it was not the same silence as before. This one was filled with shame, with reflection, with the undeniable truth that something powerful had just happened here. The waitress slumped against the counter, her face pale, her hands still trembling. For the first time, she understood what her dirty glass had truly meant. It had not broken the man. It had not silenced him. It had only called forward an army of voices far greater than hers. And the town would not forget it. The arrival had changed everything. The night after the veterans filled the diner, the town felt different. The air seemed heavier, conversations quieter, and every glance carried the memory of what had just happened. People who had been inside the diner that night could not stop thinking about it. Those who had only heard the whispers imagined it, their minds painting pictures of leather jackets, steady eyes, and silence that spoke louder than shouting. The waitress, however, tried to pretend nothing had changed. She came to work the next morning with her chin high, her smile sharp, her voice just as cutting as before. But her hands still shook when she touched the glasses, and her eyes darted nervously to the door every time it opened. She feared the sound of motorcycles. She feared the silence that came with them. The cook had grown tired of her bravado. He slammed a plate onto the counter harder than he needed to and snapped, "Cut it out." She frowned at him. "What are you talking about?" He glared at her with eyes that had seen more than she ever would. "You know what? Last night wasn't just about him. It was about you. About us. About how you made this place look." She laughed, but it was weak. "They're just trying to scare me." The cook leaned closer, lowering his voice. "No. They're reminding you of something you never learned, respect." She turned away, but the words stuck in her chest like glass. By afternoon, more whispers spread. At the grocery store, a woman told her friend, "Did you see all those veterans at the diner? My husband said it felt like church, silent, but powerful." Another woman nodded. "That waitress better be careful. That kind of disrespect doesn't just vanish." At the gas station, two men argued. One said, "It was just a glass of water. People are overreacting." The other snapped, "No, it wasn't just a glass. It was a message. And now the message has come back to her." The veteran himself, the man in the faded green jacket, remained silent in his small house at the edge of town. He fixed his fence, fed his dog, and kept to himself. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted it. He had walked into the diner, been insulted, and left with quiet dignity. To him, it was over. But to the town, it was only beginning. That evening, the diner was busy again. People came not just for food, but to see what might happen. The booths filled, the counter lined with customers, the air thick with expectation. The waitress tried to act normal, but her smile cracked when the door opened and the bell chimed. This time, only a handful of veterans entered. Not dozens, not an army. Just 5. But their presence was heavier than the full diner had been the night before. They walked in calmly, heads high, jackets marked with patches of wars past. They took their seats at one of the larger tables, folding their hands on the surface, waiting. The room grew quiet. Forks paused midair. Coffee cups hovered, untouched. Everyone turned to watch. The waitress swallowed hard and approached their table with her pad. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice thinner than usual. One of the veterans, an older man with deep lines on his face, looked up at her. His eyes were tired, but strong. His voice was low, steady, unshakable. "Yesterday, one of our brothers was here," he said. "He wore the same jacket I wear. The same patches. He carried scars we all carry. And you gave him a dirty glass." The waitress opened her mouth, but no words came out. The veteran didn't shout. He didn't lean forward. He just spoke, and his words filled the room. "You thought he was nobody. You thought silence made him weak. But silence doesn't mean weakness. Silence means strength. He didn't argue with you because he has fought bigger battles than your cruelty. He didn't complain because he has buried friends who never came home. And he didn't need to defend himself because he is not alone." The diner was still. No one moved. The waitress's eyes darted toward the owner behind the counter, but he didn't move either. His jaw was tight, his hands folded, his gaze fixed on the table of veterans. Another veteran spoke, a woman with a scar across her cheek. Her voice was sharp, but calm. "You served him a dirty glass. But what you really gave him was proof. Proof that even here, in the country he fought for, people like you can't see past your own hate. You thought you were clever. But now the whole town sees you for what you are." The waitress's cheeks burned red. She started, but her voice cracked. "I didn't mean." The first veteran raised his hand, stopping her words. "We don't need your excuses. We don't need your lies. We came here to remind you, and this whole town, what honor looks like. And it doesn't look like you." He reached into his pocket, pulled out cash, and set it on the table. The others did the same, placing bills beside their empty cups. They hadn't even ordered food. Then the woman spoke again, her voice softer now. "Respect isn't given because of skin color. Respect isn't given because of money. Respect is earned, and he earned it long before you were born." They stood together, pushing back their chairs, the sound scraping against the floor. The cook wiped his hands on his apron and nodded slightly to them, a quiet sign of solidarity. The veterans nodded back, then walked toward the door. Before leaving, the older man paused. He turned his head slightly toward the waitress, his voice calm but final. "You should pray you never face the battles he has faced. Because then you'd understand what true strength looks like." The door opened. The bell chimed. And they were gone. The diner remained frozen for a long moment. Then slowly, conversations returned, though quieter, more careful. The waitress stood stiff, her pad shaking in her hand, her eyes burning with shame and fear. She had been confronted not with shouting, not with violence, but with truth. And truth was heavier than anything she had ever carried. The reckoning was not in fists. It was not in anger. It was in dignity. In calm voices. In presence. And the town, watching it unfold, would not forget. The sun rose heavy over the small town the next morning. Its golden light touched the rooftops, the quiet streets, and finally the old diner that now stood at the center of whispers and arguments. For decades, that diner had been the heart of the town, where farmers came for coffee before dawn, where truckers ate before long drives, where kids bought milkshakes on Friday nights. But now its windows seemed darker, its walls colder. The laughter that once filled it had been replaced by unease. Inside, the waitress moved with tense, jerky steps. Her smile was gone. Her voice cracked when she asked for orders. Every time the door opened, her head snapped up in fear, expecting the veterans to return. But they didn't. They had already said everything they needed to. Their silence now was louder than any words. The owner leaned against the counter, his face pale, his jaw tight. He had always thought of his diner as safe ground, a place where politics, arguments, and fights had no place. But now, because of one glass, his diner had become a battlefield of truth and shame. He had not stopped his waitress when she made her cruel gesture. He had stayed silent. And now he carried that silence like a stone in his chest. By mid-morning, the town's newspaper had picked up the story. A young reporter, who had been sitting quietly in the diner that first night, had written an article, "Dishonored in Silence, Veteran Humiliated at Local Diner." The words spread quickly. By noon, people were calling, texting, sharing. Some defended the diner. Some condemned it. But one thing was certain, no one could ignore it anymore. When lunchtime came, the booths filled again, not with regular customers, but with strangers. People from nearby towns, drawn by the story, curious to see the place where it all happened. Some came to show support for the veteran. Others came out of morbid curiosity. But every face carried judgment. Every set of eyes looked around as if searching for ghosts. The waitress hated it. She hated the way people stared at her. She hated the whispers. She hated the feeling that her name was now tied to a single act, a single dirty glass. For the first time in her life, she realized what it felt like to be truly exposed. The cook watched her with cold eyes. He had lost his patience with her long ago, but now he also felt pity. He shook his head, muttering under his breath. "Some lessons, you only learn the hard way." That evening, the veterans returned, not in silence, not in numbers, but in memory. People wore jackets, hats, and shirts that honored their service. Small American flags were tucked into shirt pockets and pinned to jackets. Families walked in with framed photos of their fathers, brothers, and sisters who had served. The diner became a shrine, not because anyone planned it, but because the people demanded it. And then something unexpected happened. The veteran himself, the man with the green jacket and the calm, steady eyes, returned. He did not come with others. He came alone, walking with quiet steps, his posture strong, his gaze unbroken. When he entered, the room fell silent again. Not because of fear, but because of respect. He walked to the counter, the very place where he had been humiliated days earlier, and sat down. The waitress froze. Her hands trembled. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The owner slowly stepped forward, his throat tight, his voice shaking. "Sir," the owner said softly, "I owe you an apology. I should have spoken that day. I should have stopped what happened. Instead, I said nothing. And silence made me guilty too." The veteran looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, his face unreadable. The owner turned to the waitress. His voice was harsher now, sharp with truth. "And you brought this storm on all of us. Your disrespect did not just fall on him. It fell on me, on this diner, on this town. And now, we are all paying for it." The waitress opened her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes. I didn't mean." But the veteran raised his hand gently, stopping her words just as his brothers and sisters had days before. His voice was quiet, steady, but it carried through the room. "I don't need your apology," he said. "Because this was never about me alone. This was about what I represent. I carry the memories of men and women who gave everything. I wear this jacket not for pride, but for the dead who cannot wear theirs anymore. When you gave me that dirty glass, you spit on more than me. But I didn't answer you. I didn't need to. Because I knew the truth would answer for me." His words filled the diner. People lowered their heads. Some wiped tears from their eyes. The cook crossed his arms, his lips tight, as if holding back emotion. The veteran then stood, pushing his chair back. He placed money on the counter for a meal he hadn't eaten. "The diner's fate isn't in my hands," he said, turning toward the owner. "It's in yours. How you choose to carry this from today, that will decide whether this place stands in honor or falls in shame." He nodded once, then walked out. The bell above the door chimed, and silence followed him into the night. The waitress broke down then, her shoulders shaking, tears running freely. For the first time, the weight of her actions truly crashed over her. The owner closed his eyes, his hand pressed against the counter as though it were the only thing holding him up. The customers, stunned and humbled, left slowly, their voices soft, their hearts heavy with the lesson they had witnessed. In the days that followed, the diner's business dropped. Some boycotted it, refusing to eat where a veteran had been disrespected. Others came to watch the spectacle, to sit in the same booth, to say they had seen the place where the story unfolded. But the laughter was gone. The joy was gone. And the reputation of the diner was scarred forever. The waitress eventually quit, unable to endure the stares, the whispers, the shame. She left town, but her name remained a warning, her act a lesson that parents told their children: respect those who carried burdens you will never understand. The cook stayed, working his shifts in silence, his face harder but his respect for the veterans clearer. The owner fought to rebuild trust, to bring back the spirit of his diner, but the stain never fully faded. And the veteran? He returned to his quiet life on the edge of town. He fixed his fence. He fed his dog. He sat on his porch at sunset. He didn't speak of the diner again, because he didn't need to. The town had already spoken for him. The lesson had been carved into its memory. The diner's fate was not fire, not destruction, not sudden collapse. Its fate was quieter, heavier. Its fate was to live on, scarred, a reminder of a day when one dirty glass revealed the truth about honor, respect, and silence. And for years to come, whenever the story was told, people would say the same words in hushed voices: he never raised his voice. He never lifted a hand. And yet, he won.